time now for breathing lessons with Susan Kay, helping you learn how to breathe and release those beliefs that have been binding you so you can just enjoy life and breathe easy. Breathing lessons with Susan Kay.
Hi, this is Susan Kay. Welcome back to my channel, where we are going to continue our series on fundamental Christianity and orphan culture. Before I get started today, I would like to recognize Ukraine and say that as Americans, most Americans are standing up with Ukraine and condemning the tyranny that is going on in your country right now. Our hearts are with you. I wish there was more we could do for you other than, sanctions. Our president is concerned about starting World War III. I don't blame him on that. But we are hoping and praying that things will get resolved soon and that life can go back to normal in Ukraine and that people are safe. I also want to say that we are impressed with your strength and your courage and the courage and strength of your president. So today we're going to continue on with the lie. This is the subject today. We're going to talk about the lie. We are going to talk about the result of the lie and some more about other things that Christianity has set up as norms in the religion that is talked about a lot. So, the story is in the garden, and we have talked about the garden being a place where God is more than other places, supposedly. And I just find it interesting, this is kind of a side note, but it's interesting, that God was in the garden, but he still came to visit them. So his presence was there, but then at some point in time he would encounter them more than he would at other times. So right from the beginning, there's this idea that God is somewhere else, even though he may be close, and that he comes to us to visit with us. And we're going to talk about that more in the next video, so I'm not going to put a lot of time and energy into that. So in this beautiful garden, where everything is wonderful, life is perfect, along comes a serpent. And again, I'm going to just say this, that just because you may not agree with this story or believe this story, I think it's important that we examine the story. Because if you don't believe it, you can look at it like mythology. Mythology is really a series of stories that gives us archetypes and helps us to understand life. And so in that sense, we could actually say that this is an archetypal story and that we can gain a lot of information from it to compare in our lives as to what we are going through and what's happening with us. My camera's a little bit down. I'm going to put it up just a little. All right, there we go. So the serpent comes along and he says something that piques their interest. And there's different versions of this story, so if I don't quote the version you're used to, please just let that go. I'm not being nitpicky about exactly what I'm saying. So he comes along and he says something like, has God actually said not to eat of the fruit of the tree? Well, he knows that if you eat the fruit, then you will be like him. So it's almost like he sets up this idea with these people that God is keeping something from them, and he is coming to tell them something about God that they don't know. If I had to name this serpent, I would name him religion. Religion always comes claiming to know more about God than we do. I think that's very interesting. So, just by the inference that God knows if you'll do this, then you will have what it takes to be like God. There is a lie that is tucked into that lie that people had to have, these original people had to have adopted. And what the adoption of that lie was, what it was is, you're not like God. You're not like God. God is different from you. And as Christians, we believed that lie. We believed that God was different than humans, and that God and humans were separate, and that we needed to try to be like God. And so these two individuals, according to the story, went ahead and ate the fruit. And when they did, according to the story, their eyes were open, which we're going to talk about that maybe in a minute. Their eyes were open and they could see what was good and what was evil. This story depicts the birthplace of dualism. Dualism is the belief that there is black and white, God and evil, yes and no. There's only up and down. There's no shadow. There's no gray area. There's no nuance in the world. You're either right or you're wrong. And it's very black and white thinking. America as a whole is very dualistic in its thinking. I think people around the world are actually very dualistic thinking. I think they think this way also, especially Western culture. If you go back into indigenous people, you don't find black and white thinking. You find holistic, connection type thinking. And remember, orphan culture is built from a lack of connection. It's the premise from which orphan culture is built. So a lack of connection. Dualism produces a lack of connection. It gives no room for otherness. So if you are a black and white thinker and you decide that people are either with me or they're not with me, and there is no other place to stand in your life, that they either have to agree with me or they disagree with me, therefore they're either with me or they're against me, then it's a lack of connection with people who are not, like me. Dualistic black and white thinking has a tendency to guilt and shame people. It, in its more nefarious forms, gaslights people. If someone doesn't agree with me, then I will gaslight them and tell them that what they're seeing isn't real, or I don't believe your story, or whatever that looks like for them. Dualistic thinking, black and white thinking, is very behavior focused. You're either doing the right thing or you're doing the wrong thing. It's not personal. It has nothing or little or nothing to do with personal integrity. Personal integrity has to do with the autonomy of the person involved, and it takes people out of groupthink. It takes people out of the crowd and allows them to stand on their own and choose for themselves what is right in their life and right for their life, or wrong for their lives. I don't know how to give an example of that. Okay, let's take alcohol, for example. Maybe you are a person who has a very addictive personality. So maybe for you, the consumption of alcohol is a wrong choice. So you stand in your personal integrity as to what is good for you, and you may not drink. Whereas you see others who do drink, and a dualistic person would judge that and say, they're wrong, I'm right. It's not okay to do this. It's not okay to do that. Or it is, you should do this, or you shouldn't do that. And it really comes down to personal integrity and what's right or wrong for the individual. But people who are dualistic in their thinking, and they are very dualistic in thinking in regards to fundamental Christianity, And I do want to say this, I say this quite often, and I will continue to say it. You will find all of this in varying degrees in Christianity. There are groups that are extremely black and white thinkers. There are groups who fundamentally, like on the basically are black and white thinkers, but there's more room for nuance with the thinking. So if you hear me say something and it doesn't quite fit with your experience with the religion, just know that I understand that can be true. Black and white thinking creates a lack of empathy and compassion. Empathy is the ability to sit with someone who is in pain, who is experiencing hardships, even if those hardships were created by the person, and give them room to explore their own pain without moralizing, without fixing, without giving pat answers, without invoking your own God to fix it or whatever. I found, I myself, when I was in the thick of Christianity, I lacked compassion. I lacked empathy. I didn't know how to sit with someone and just let them be in pain and just be there creating space for their pain. And really, that's what empathy is. You sit with someone and you create space. And you may do it by saying, look, I've never been through this with you myself before, but I am here with you. I will just stand by you as you go through this. Christianity has a tendency to want to fix everything because somehow we have adopted the idea that pain isn't good, that suffering isn't good. It shows that there's something wrong in our lives or that God is displeased with us somehow. It takes on a lot of different meanings for different people. In the more nefarious forms of dualism, parts that have like metastasized, if this type of thinking has metastasized in someone, it becomes very condemnatory. It divides everybody into camps of with me or against me, yes and no, enemy and colleague or whatever. They're with me, they're against me, and it weaponizes. And it gives us reasons to attack. And we're going to really, really look into this later on as to what this looks in our society as a whole, because our society as a whole has adopted orphan culture and everything that goes with orphan culture. And it actually, in the very worst stages of this type of thinking, can kill. And I do want to just say 2 words right here to illustrate what I'm talking about. Vladimir Putin. People like Vladimir Putin, people who are dictators, who are, Gaddafi, and we had Mussolini, and we've had Stalin, and we've had Hitler, and we've had these types of people who are, they are at the way out in the fringes of this type of thinking that says, I have the right to take over and dominate people to make them do the right thing or to be on my side. So even in a lot of times in these situations, there is a actual, what's the word, mental illness that actually takes place. My notes just slipped out of here, so I'm going to put them back up. Sorry. Isn't this fun? You get to watch me do all these weird things. Okay. So watch the news, see what's going on, and recognize it for what it is. It is this type of thinking that says, first of all, everything is separate. There is no connection between people. Everything is separate. We're going to get into that later. I want to just make this statement. The acceptance of the fruit of a dualism or separation theology. You'll hear me talk about that. So dualism in religion is separation theology. Is not only not a problem in the church, but it is the main course while sitting around the foot of the tree every Sunday morning for much of mainstream Christianity. What does that look like? It looks like the reminder that you're not like God. It's the reminder that you're a sinner. It's a reminder about original sin and that you have to have someone else do something for you in order for you to have a connection to God. It's to remind you that God is separate from you and that unless you follow these laws and rules, there's no way to connect you back to God. And I am going to get into the sacrifice of Jesus in the next video. In this one, I do want to talk about after they ate the fruit. I think it's really interesting that according to the story, they looked at their own nakedness. So in a sense, it was like they could see themselves for the first time. And they were ashamed. I really think it's interesting that shame is so deeply connected to this mindset that when we are just stripped down to our basic selves, and as human beings we experience this all the time, there's this sense of shame that we're not enough, that we aren't perfect, that we have flaws, basically that we're human. Shame on us for being human. So at this moment in time in this story, God does something that supposedly that becomes a corner piece of this story and of this religion going on. He killed. He shed blood. There was blood shed in the garden. He slaughtered an animal, and he supposedly took the skin of that animal and he covered them. It's very important that we keep these two things in mind. We have to keep in mind blood atonement and covering. Those are going to be important points moving forward. The idea of the bloodshed is that when evil is perceived, that there must be the eradication of that evil by the way of shedding blood. The sin that they supposedly created, the sin nature that supposedly was born in man at that moment in time, had to be dealt with. And the only way to deal with it is to kill and is to shed blood. And in shedding that blood, then it creates a way to cover it. These are things that are so deeply enmeshed in what we see going forward. It's very important that you understand. They were banished, and then they were banished from the garden. They were made to actually leave that place of presence. So, from there on out, they were made to farm, and nothing would come up from the earth, and women were supposedly from that point on in time, having problems in childbirth. And the serpent, who I guess was walking around prior to this, his curse was to be made to crawl on his belly. Just picture a snake with legs. That's just a pretty funny thing to think about. So who knows, what this story depicts as what the serpent was prior to what we know as, snakes today. But I want to show you something. They were not thrown out of the garden because of the adoption of this new way of thinking. That was not a problem for God, supposedly. The problem was that they were disobedient. That God told them not to do something, and they did it. Therefore, they're out. In this story, everything is external. They're living in an external place. They have an external God. They have an external enemy. They must do something externally in order to show themselves worthy of being like God. And then their behavior, which is external, became the thing that took them out of the presence of God. So there's nothing internal in this story about how the man and the woman were inside of themselves. They weren't connecting to themselves. They were trying to keep connected to all these external things. And as we go forward, we're going to actually see how external everything is. Everything is external. We'll be talking about the external conscience. In fact, I'm going to write that down for external. If I can find a pen. Anyway, external conscience. I'll know that's what that is. So that's really it for this video. Next video, we're going to talk about separation and visitation, indebtedness, and more separation. So it goes from separation to separation, and in the middle there's visitation and indebtedness. So I hope you'll join me for the next video about fundamentalist Christianity and the orphan culture.
Thanks for watching Breathing Lessons with Susan K. For more breathing lessons, stay tuned to this channel and learn to breathe with Susan K.